Hello, Robs. We're back with Frank Leslie's Christmas book and some Great Lakes Christmas ale for festive purposes only, of course. Bonny's Fortunes, and this actually um, goes for about 50, 60 pages, so I shall read it in little chapters. Bonny's Fortunes by the author of, what's that say? Served Out, Not Found Out, A Little Too Clever, Little Empress Joan, etc., etc. And let me see if I can find out who the author actually is. It appears to be by Madeline Bonavia Hunt from 1886. Although that would not be correct since this book is 18... No, that would be right. 1889 to 1890. Bonny's Fortunes. Bonny was playing by himself. All right, Bonny's a dude. And making a terrific noise in the quiet house. Why he made such a noise, I cannot think, because as a rule, he was as quiet and dull a little fellow as you ever could see. He played at queer games, invented wholly and solely by himself, or he sat on a little chair staring into the fire. Let's say when? When there was one, and thinking about no one knows what by the hour together. It was always a very quiet house, but today it was more quiet than ever. And in the midst of this silence, Bonny, who had been sitting looking at the fire as usual, suddenly jumped up, dragged all the heavy dining room chairs out of their places, and put them in a row across the room. Then he flung open the door very wide, marched away to the end of the hall, came flying in with as much clatter and yells as shrill as he could manage, and dashed himself against the chairs, which had purposely been placed with the legs of one tilted against another, so that they might go over easily. Down went three at a go, but Bonny rushed forward and knocked over the others. Then he threw himself between the legs that were poking out in all directions, uttering shrieks and groans. Then there was dead silence for a while. Then Bonny began to emerge from between the legs of a chair, carefully putting his hand to his head. I'm sorry, I'm scratching my leg, as if he were much hurt. Then he held a conversation with himself in which he said very often that it was a very, very bad hurt, but if you don't cry, Bonny, it'll soon be very nice and well again. And he limped about the room and declared he couldn't move at all. But presently he got quite well. Then he put the chairs up in a row and did the whole thing over again. He was standing with his back against the hall door, preparing to rush full speed onto the line of chairs, when old Mary came along. She pushed Bonny on one side and softly opened the door. There stood an old gentleman whom Bonny knew well. Worse, too, he came in and wiped his shoes on the mat. Bonny flew off straight at the chairs, regardless of old Mary. Bonny, said the doctor severely, what are you doing, child, making all this fearful noise? Oh, he's an odd child, said Mary. His poor ma lying there so bad, too. I dursn't leave her to see what the noise was. Bonny went on with his game, quite regardless of their remarks. The doctor called him, but he only stared and twisted his long, thin body among the confusion of chair legs, uttering groans and little shrieks, which he did so naturally, that the old gentleman asked with a puzzled face, well, now, have you hurt yourself? But Bonny refused to say, only he suddenly collapsed on the floor and lay there with his eyes closed and his body stiff. The doctor took hold of his shoulders and pulled him onto his feet, exclaiming, Now what's all that old... Now, what's all this? You dare, Bonny cried fiercely. The doctor was no favorite of his, especially since he had drawn Bonny on his knee one day, and then, as Bonny declared, stuck a small knife into him. Bonny never forgave him, and nothing would induce him to go on the old man's knee a second time. There was not much love lost between them on either side. I'm buried dead, I am, he cried, resentfully when the doctor made him stand upright. She's a window train and she's lundled. Does that say lundled or tundled? She's tundled, I'm guessing it means trundled down and killed all the peoples. You're a nasty man, you are. And my window train. She's very good and plays with me all the time, she does. The doctor couldn't understand a bit what it was all about. The child always talked incoherently and mixed up words in the wildest way. Now, Master Bonny, you pick up those chairs and don't make no more noise, Mary said. And then she and the doctor went away. Bonny put the chairs back in their places rather regretfully. Then he stood with his finger in his mouth, staring out of the window. There was nothing to be seen except the little square yard with one very large pear tree that hid from view the other houses. Bonny watched the sparrows till the cuckoo clock on the mantelpiece began striking. In a minute he was standing on a chair, gazing at the wonderful bird. He had often heard it say cuckoo before, but no one had ever shown him the bird quite close. Now he was all alone and could look at it as long as he liked. She opens his mouth like the little dirds in the tree, he said to himself. She lives in the plock, I think, and she's got a tail. She has, 'cause she opens his mouth like the other dicky dirds, and they's got tails. I want to see his tail, I do. I'll stroke him, I will. So he pushed his finger in the little door, which snapped to, catching his finger tight. He's a very spiteful thing, he is, Bonny said angrily. Perhaps he's hungry. I'll get him some red and rudder, I will. Bonny went down into the deserted kitchen and found some bread, with which he returned in triumph. But the cuckoo had shut himself into his house and would not come out, not even when Bonny called him dear cuckoo. But after waiting a long time, thinking the bird might be asleep, Bonny got angry and cried out in his quick, funny way, You're a very bad bird, you are, and if you don't eat nice bread, you're a dainty boy. And he'll be put in prison and killed, naughty, bad, wicked bird you are. The door flew open and out came Mr. Cuckoo, bowing and cuckooing as amiably as possible. Benny laughed with glee. He broke the bread and pushed it in at the door. The cuckoo hardly seemed to like it, for he said, Cuckoo, in a very slow, half-hearted fashion, while he finally, with a very long, and there's an accompaniment, melancholy note, stuck his head out of the door with his mouth open, gasping. Bonny was rather frightened. He gave the bird a shove, which sent him back into his house, pulling the door close with an angry bang. Then Bonny pulled the door open and pushed the rest of the bread and butter inside for Mr. Cuckoo to eat at his leisure, for it was evident he was a very touchy bird. There was nothing for Bonny to do. He went out into the hall and stood a little while listening. He had been told he was not on any account to come upstairs because his mother was ill and could not be worried with him. But he had been downstairs alone so long that he thought she must be well again now, so he went up and stood outside her door. Mother, he called out, tapping at the door, let me come in, I say, 'cause I's very tired, and I'll be very angry soon, I tell you. A long silence, then the door was unclosed about an inch, and one of Mary's eyes and half her nose peeped through. Go away, Master Bonny. What a naughty boy you are. Go away and keep quiet, do. I've keeped it quiet, I have, and I want suffin' a play with, Bonny said firmly. Now you're a dreadful child, said old Mary in an angry whisper. Go up in the nursery and put it straight, and by then I'll come and get you something to eat. What you say, he asked slowly. Go up and put the nursery straight. Can I come in and see my mother? I'll be very quiet, Bonny persisted. No, go and do what I tell you. Bonny went up into the deserted nursery It was a room at the top of the house where Bonny spent a good deal of time playing by himself. His few toys were there, and generally there was a fire with a guard before it. Bonny loved the fire. It was quite a companion to him. It was brother, sister, and playmate. He saw all sorts of strange things there when he sat gazing into it by the hour together. But today there was no fire. Oh, shit. Only dull ashes in a dirty grate. The floor was littered with yesterday's mess. Cardboard boxes out of which Bonny was fond of making coal trains, as he called them, when he had filled them with little bits of coal. Chairs turned topsy-turvy, sticks of wood for building houses, scraps of paper scribbled over and dabbed with paint, 2 or 3 dilapidated dolls, all undergoing punishment in odd corners. Bonny began in a half-hearted way to put the things into a little cupboard, but he was growing cross, and he could not help taking up the dolls and smacking and pinching them a bit, just to vent his ill temper. Presently he wandered to the window and stared out. There were houses opposite, and in one there was a splendid fire which lighted up all the room and let Bonny see everything inside it. He forgot all his loneliness and his ill temper. His nose was pressed flat against the window pane, and his round eyes opened as wide as they would go. He beheld a little girl with long, fair curls and a lady dancing about together. And there was another lady sitting down with her back to Bonny. She was doing something with her hands, for every now and then he saw them moving quickly up and down. But stranger than all, there was a gentleman standing behind her, moving one hand up and down, backward and forward, just like a mechanical toy of a man shaving himself that Bonny had seen in a shop window. It was all very puzzling to Bonny, who could not make out a bit what they were doing. In a few minutes more the lady and the little girl came to the window. The child laughed and nodded, and then down went the blinds. Bonny turned away. It was getting quite dusk. Then he went downstairs, feeling cross. Standing in the hall was his father, who had just let himself in. "Here, Bonny," he said, "what are you doing down here in such an untidy mess? How's your mother?" Bonny stared for a minute and then said, "What?" "There, don't look at me in that daft way, child. How's your mother?" When Bonny was cross, he poured out torrents of words with little sense in them. I love this kid. He was very cross just now. "She's very dead," he said, quickly, all the words running one into another. "Old Nan doctor, he stick little knives in him. He do, and pull her head off, 'cause she stares like a stupid, and she buried dead, I tell you." Mr. Cameron heard little else than the word dead, for he never was able to make out much of Bonny's gibberish. He thrust the child aside and ran up the stairs to the bedroom. By and by, his father came down again. He called Bonny. "Look here," he said severely. "Why did you tell me that story about your mother, you naughty child?" Bonny stared blankly and then asked, "What?" "You know what I said," his father replied. "Why did you tell a story and say your mother was dead?" "People is dead," Bonny muttered to himself in an injured tone. "They tunneled out of the window train and all killed." As this book is about illustrations, we appear upon this one. "Kissing goes by favor," illustrated proverb. His father looked at him angrily for a moment. Then his face relaxed. "I suppose it's only stupidity," he exclaimed. "You can take him down with you, Mary." So Bonny went downstairs and feasted on tea and hot toast, which he devoured ravenously, for he was very hungry and had no idea that he had done or said anything wrong. What a queer little story this is. And that will end chapter 1. What was the chapter 1 called? Bonny's fortune. Chapter 1, an accident on the line. Very, very strange. All right, Babs, goodbye. Goodbye.